Right, so what made you want to become a teacher?
I wanted to become a teacher because I loved English literature. Well, not just English literature, I mean literature in general. I had some amazing English teachers myself, and in ninth and 11th grade, those teachers really inspired me. And I like teenagers, and I like being in high school, so I always wanted to be a high school teacher.
Okay. Why did you want to teach English, like, specifically? I know you said you had teachers that inspired you, but was there anything specific they did, or?
The I don't know that it's anything specific. Well, my ninth grade teacher taught me all kinds of literature that I loved, like Romeo and Juliet, To Kill a Mockingbird, Great Expectations, all these amazing works. So, well, and I just remember I liked her a lot. My 11th grade teacher was very young and very enthusiastic, and just because I didn't really like the literature we were. I'm not an American literature fan for the most part, and that's what that class was. But she was so interesting that but mostly English because I loved literature, and I couldn't imagine um, majoring in something where I had to read real textbooks. It seemed to me while my roommate was reading sociology, I was reading all of the greatest literature ever written, and I can't figure out why anyone would do anything else.
Okay. Well, when you got to decide what grade you wanted to teach, what one did you initially want to teach, and maybe why specifically did you end up with 12th grade, or why did you want them?
I didn't particularly want 12th grade. I wanted to teach in a high school, but my first job was in a junior high back in the day when junior high was 7th through ninth. But I taught ninth grade, and I wanted to move to a high school, but they told me they were moving to the middle school, so they'd be moving me anyway into a high school when the ninth grade teachers moved. As it happened, we moved to Orange, so I got this job and started out in 10th grade only. And then when the AP teacher um, retired, they asked me to teach AP English, which scared me. You should know that because you were one of my students, but not one of my first students. In fact, if you graduate, I've been teaching it now almost 20 years. So, but when I first started, it terrified me. The whole thought of, oh my goodness, they're going to take that test, and what if they all fail it? And but I loved. It turned out I loved teaching British literature, and I loved teaching really motivated students. And then when they moved me completely to 12th grade with 12th standard, I really prefer the more mature the student, the more I like them. So
Okay. Um, what are some of your greatest moments in teaching?
I can't even begin to answer that question. I, I'm sure it always would be. I hate to say this, but always with AP classes because, as I said, AP students are so internally motivated, and they're so much fun to work with because they will pretend that they like sonnets in order to please me. So all of those moments are when we're talking and they're saying things, especially when they say things that I never thought of before, that and I just say, wow, that's really smart, and no, I never thought of that at all. And I suppose those are because then you know that they're getting it even more than more than I could ever. And I actually think a lot of my AP students are smarter than I am. It's just that I have more knowledge at this point, at least about literature, not about math, science, or anything else, but about literature. I just happen to know more right now.
Right. So in contrast to your greatest moments, what are some of your most difficult moments? Some things that have been hard.
It's really hard for me when there's so many. It's hard for me when I can't get through to a student, when um, when someone says something, say, about a great work of literature, and I don't even know how to respond to it. Yeah, that that they're so far, and I don't mean far off the mark in that they don't understand that they don't like it, and I can't do anything to make them understand that literature, because I don't believe everybody has to like every piece of literature, but they have to be able to appreciate, say, Shakespeare or Jane Austen. And when a student, when I can't get that from them at all, that is really frustrating. When students come in and they don't want to learn anything, and I try so hard to motivate them, and they have no motivation, their grades won't motivate them. When I first started teaching, if I said to a student, you need to come to school, or you're not going to pass. And they say, oh, I'm going to come to school. I used to believe them. And I'd say, oh, they're going to come to school. And then, of course, they didn't. So frustrations for a teacher, I think for every teacher, simply that we're here because we really want our students to learn. And there are so many students who don't want to learn, and there's nothing we can do. You can't open a brain and just pour the knowledge in.
So what are some strategies maybe that you would use for kids that aren't engaging or maybe missing the mark? Like, how would you try to help engage them?
For 12th grade, in a standard level class, I figure out pretty early on what actually makes them interested, so that we still have to do sonnets, but let's say it's a class that doesn't like poetry at all. We just won't do quite as many sonnets. And that class, actually, someone in there might say, why don't we read a novel? Aren't we going to read a novel? And then other kids will say, yeah, I'd like to read a novel. And then we'll start reading a novel that will work for, well, obviously not for sonnets. There's no, but they're always, and I tell them, and you probably know this because you had me, I tell a lot of personal stories, and I tell a lot more personal stories to a standard class than I do to an AP class because it makes them more interested. It's like if I can tell them something about myself that has to do with the work of literature, then it becomes more human for them, maybe. I don't know. But
okay. Okay, a little bit of change of tone. With so many restrictions and regulations coming in on teachers from like administration, like with submitting lesson plans and submitting objectives and all these things, maybe how much do you think administration maybe should be involved in the lesson planning process? And maybe like how much should teachers be like left alone to their own ideas for lesson planning?
It so much depends on the teacher. I've also been department chair and lead teacher of my department for, I don't even know how long, a long time. And we've had teachers here who will work very, very hard and make sure that they're following the curriculum. And we've had teachers who don't follow the curriculum at all and show way too many movies. And so as long as the department as a whole is taking responsibility for itself, and I mean the whole department, then administrators who I think often forget what it's like to be in front of a classroom as soon as they get behind a desk instead shouldn't be involved at all. But if the teachers won't take responsibility, if you don't have, and I have a very strong department, and we're divided into teams so that there are 3 of us on the 12th grade team, and I'm also that team leader, so I know exactly what the other 12th grade teachers are doing. So if they're not doing what they're supposed to do, I, as team leader, and then also department chair, can go in and say, you can't be showing Shrek. There is absolutely no reason to show Shrek. So, and, but if you don't have a strong department, somebody's got to take responsibility. And there are always a few teachers who I don't want to say anything bad about others, but there are teachers who will show too many movies. They just, they get tired and they'll show a movie every week. And kids see movies all the time. They don't need to see them in school very often at all. As you know, because I think you saw one the entire year.
Yeah,
Othello.
one, maybe 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
That's okay, though. I enjoyed that about class, though. It wasn't all about the movies. It was really about talking about the texts. What was your first time teaching like?
My first year was very strange. It was different because I graduated mid-year. I graduated in January, and I got a job almost immediately. And my first job was I was taking over for 2 teachers because the first teacher, whom the kids had loved, had been teacher of the year and was, well, anyway, she was a lovely, wonderful woman. Evidently, I never met her. But she was going to have a baby, and she was very ill, so she had to quit teaching. The next woman that they hired to come in to take over for her had never taught at all except at the college level, and evidently pretty much had a nervous breakdown in front of the kids after about a month. So I was coming in third, and the kids right away, for the most part, thought, well, we can get rid of her too, because they had loved their first teacher. And kids, no matter what anyone says, teenagers are not adaptable. They don't like change, and they felt betrayed by that first teacher who had gotten sick. How dare she? So my first semester was second semester. It started in January and ended that June, and it was pretty miserable because I spent most of my time just playing traffic cop and trying to keep kids in their seats until, I don't know, maybe halfway through. I said, you're not getting rid of me. I'm not going anywhere. You know, I need the money, and you don't scare me. And then it calmed down in most classes, although there was one class that never did calm down. So my first experience was pretty awful, but starting that next September, I was so happy because now these are my classes, you know, and I didn't have that same experience with kids of coming in thinking they could get rid of me, because now I was just their teacher.
Okay. What are your opinions of Common Core versus the standards of learning?
Are you talking about Common Core nationwide, as in every other, the 48 states except ours?
Except like Virginia and Texas.
Because we actually call our core tests here, not the SOLs. Okay. All right. You didn't have that experience in English because English is a class all unto itself, AP English. Okay. But in standard classes, we give core tests. That's what we call them, so that every teacher has to be at the same place at the same time. And those tests I like very much because it means that even for me, and I've always been very serious about it, if you tell me that this is my job to teach this, that's what I'm going to teach. So for me, though, it keeps me on track. It's like, okay, so I know on this day, or around this day, because of course we have snow days and things, I have to be at this point where they can take a test on sonnets. And because we've worked very hard on those tests, I think they're valid tests. Now, the SOLs, I also don't have a problem with. Now, Common Core, I'm not familiar enough with them. I've heard a lot of complaints about the math tests and things. I'm not familiar with Common Core because I don't have to teach Common Core tests. But the SOLs in Virginia, the fact that we have the 11th grade SOL, which is really just a reading and writing test, I think now that the passages are a little bit longer, I think some of the passages are too long, but I think every 11th grader should be able to read and write at an 11th grade level. So while I can't speak to a history test that's all facts and things, I don't have a problem, except that the passages are too long. I wish they'd shorten the passages because I want all of the students to read and write at the 11th grade level when they're in 11th grade. I teach seniors, however, so it doesn't really, other than being department chair and doing summer work, because we're a small system, we do all of our own curriculum work, and we do it during the summer, and they pay us for it. So I'm sure otherwise we wouldn't be so ready to do it. So it's important, you know, it's important that teachers be teaching reading and writing at grade level, and that's what an SOL forces us to do.
Okay. How do you feel about the increased use of technology in the classroom?
Well, I love a PowerPoint because it makes it so easy for people to take notes, and it's no longer, I don't have to spell anything. But as for the other things, I have the technology director coming in when we start our papers in a standard class next week to show all the kids, first block, how to do Google Docs, because I don't know how to do it. And I figured if he showed them, I could take notes, and then I could do it second and third block. The new teachers are so much more comfortable with all the technology. You know, all I really do is PowerPoint. So if we had a lot more computers in the school, it would be so good if the kids could do like grammar lessons on computer, because there's so many out there. In fact, a lot of them I print and then use them, but because kids love to click, you know, that would be really good. But at the same time, I'm not really familiar with it, and I'm worried that if we get to that point that I'd always have to be like watching, are you still on the right page? You know, are you not? So I don't know. Technology is a good thing, but you're talking to the wrong teacher because I don't know enough about it.
That's kind of how I feel too. Like, do you worry maybe about them getting overstimulated? Like, there's too much of screens and of autocorrect.
Right, and I'm also worried that they won't stay on those pages, because when we're in the library, it's a constant, why are you on that page? Why are you not doing your research? And in a classroom, the computers would not be facing me. So and that's another worry, that it's a lot easier if they're doing a paper and pencil thing. But I think probably like Miss Forkham, a new teacher here, is doing probably amazing things. She's letting them use their phones, which I almost never ever let them. Well, I don't ever let them take out their phones. So But she's evidently letting them use their phones to look up vocabulary words and stuff. And I just wonder how she knows they're not texting their friends. So.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. What do you think has been one of the funniest moments in your career in the classroom? Like, what are some funny times you've had?
mostly they're not really things you want to share, because they're things that okay, I'm just going to tell you this one, all right?
Okay.
And that was, when I taught 10th grade, we were talking about Woodstock, because it had to do with God teachers and God tempters and all these different things. And it was some, and I actually know the song, I can't think of it right now, but it was all about the golden age. So we just listened to this rock song and that they had played at Woodstock. And then I said, so here are all these teenagers, and they all came together. And as soon as I said came together, I thought of the other kind of came, and just really cracked up. And of course, none of the kids knew why. But I was standing there thinking, you shouldn't talk like that. But they didn't get it, so it was all okay. So.
That's funny. Oh my goodness.
But really, the kids are usually a lot funnier than I am. I mean, they're just very funny.
Yeah. Has there ever been student work that has like affected you? Like, if so, like what was it about? Like, how did it affect you? Like any sort of really well written or really well done project or anything like that?
Well, the projects at the end of the year that my AP students do often absolutely astound me, because I'm not artistic, and so many kids really do wonderful things. You should go upstairs and see the new, the new mural on the back of my wall for 1984.
Oh.
You know, it's just so well done. So those things are amazing. And it's also, I remember one year a student wrote his research paper on a work of literature that I'm not even that crazy about, Faust, by Christopher Marlowe. And after I read it, I wrote, you know, this is your tour de force. You don't have to go any further in your education. This is it. You know, it was so amazingly well written.
Okay. What advice would you give to new or future teachers?
Well, first I tell them that teaching, it's amazing that, you know, there are more teachers as a group, you know, than pretty much anything else. And yet teaching is one of the hardest jobs there is, and one of the most frustrating. So it has moments of where you just know, this is why I'm here. I get it, you know, and the students are all working toward a goal. Or you have a student who say came into you for AP English and would have gotten a 1 at the beginning of the year, and by the end of the year, and when the AP scores come in, they get a 4 or a 5. You go like, get that was worth it. Or in a standard class, when kids are really working hard and for instance, I had my kids for 3 hours during this one standard class, and they were working on their research papers, and I told them you could work for an hour and a half, and then we'll watch a movie for an hour and a half. And they were working so hard that I never stopped them, and they worked the entire time, and then when the 3 hours were up, they were putting up their computers, and they were all feeling so good about themselves. So there are those moments that are wonderful. Yeah. But as for advice, just know that the first couple of years you teach are really, they're difficult. You have to come up with all of, if you don't have we're a very supportive department, but even when you're a supportive department, it's all new. It's all, you may think you know Antigone, but you don't know Antigone until you teach Antigone to someone else, and then you realize all the pitfalls when they're saying Antigone, and they think Antigone is a boy, and so there are all these things that you learn as you're teaching that are exciting, but at the same time are pretty frustrating. And knowing that you're going to walk in and there are going to be a bunch of kids, some kids who just don't want to learn, no matter what you do. You know, and you're going to have to come to a place where you keep trying, and yet you accept it at the same time. So it's very contradictory. So you have to keep at it, but you go like, okay.
Alrighty, well, thank you
You're welcome.
very much for letting me interview you.